The good, the bad, and the weird. I felt ugly would be a bit harsh, and weird works better. This is all about three interesting political arrivals this week in the Westminster scene, and it involves three political outfits: Reform UK, Advance UK, and Restore Britain. If you don't know what the other two are, don't worry, I'll get into all of that in a moment. But who am I talking about? I'm talking about a former Conservative MP called Adam Holloway. He's joining Reform. I'm talking about the character known as Tommy Robinson, real name Stephen Yaxley Lennon, I believe, who is joining Advance UK as a party member. And then I'm talking about the appointment to the board of Restore Britain, which is Rupert Lowe's new outfit, of a former Tory chief whip and former Defence Secretary and Education Secretary, quite a contentious character called Gavin Williamson, who uh, is not widely liked, let's put it that way, in some political circles. And that, appointment in particularly has gone badly down with a lot of Rupert's supporters. But we'll get into all of that. First of all, thank you very much for tuning in. My name is Daniel Cremin, and I'm the host of Cremin's Corner. This is my new YouTube channel. I'm really enjoying doing it. It draws on my experience and background in public affairs, policy analysis, and I really enjoy sharing my thoughts. I'm loving getting the feedback from you. Tell me your ideas for future segments. But yeah, let's dive in now. So look, who's Adam Holloway, and why is this the good news? Why is this the good appointment? Well, so Adam was a Conservative MP for many years, between 2005 and 2024, lost his seat at the last election, and he was one of the sound Conservative MPs, one of the few genuinely really sound right-wing Tories that I could think of. And I really wanted him to join Reform, to be honest with you, before the election. When I was thinking about it myself, I was hoping people like him were going to make the break. He and Andrea Jenkins, I thought they were going to do it, but they didn't. And it was a shame. He lost his seat. Who is he? So he was a really staunch Brexiteer. He was one of the Spartans, along with Mark Francois and others. Those guys who really went to the mattresses, who, through thick and thin, opposed Theresa May's Brexit deal that was, selling out Brexit. So he was one of those guys. He also took a really robust stance against lockdowns during the pandemic. He was one of those increasingly outspoken voices, from fairly early on in 2020, to be honest, who was, pretty concerned about the direction of travel, the creeping authoritarianism, not so creeping, actually, if I'm honest. And, he took a stance, and he was one of the brave ones who, took some flack, but kind of, kept speaking out against them. And I totally accept that not everybody agrees that, lockdowns were the worst thing in the world. Totally accept in Reform there are going to be people with differing views to me on that. But for me, that was a marker of his soundness. And, his background before becoming an MP as well. He was, a captain in the Grenadier Guards. He saw action in the Iraq War, not the Iraq War, the Gulf War in the early 1990s. He later had a career as an investigative journalist, was pretty good at that by all accounts. And yeah, I think he's a real asset for Reform, actually. He's a bit of an authority on defence, as you'd imagine, but he's just good. He's really sound. He believes in limited government, low taxes. He's just got common sense. He's the kind of person you want. He knows his way around Parliament. He knows a lot. He's going to be valuable. And I know that not everybody welcomes lots of former Conservatives, or current even, members of the Conservative Parliamentary Party, the idea of them joining. But I think in this case, this is one of the sound guys, and he'll be good. Now, who's the second character again? It's Tommy Robinson. That's what he goes by, and he is joining a fledgling. It's not actually registered yet with the Electoral Commission, but it's in the works, they say. And this is Tommy Robinson, and he's joining Advance UK, which is Ben Habib's new outfit. Now, Ben Habib is a former deputy leader of Reform. This was during the period when Richard Tice was leading the party between 2021 and 2024. Now, look, Ben played a really valuable role at the time in Reform. He was, one of these kind of regular media performers for the party on GB News and Talk. I thought he did a really good job at the time. I think it's a real shame that Ben has ended up kind of spinning off in the direction he's gone. I think he's kind of, if I'm just going to be blunt here, I've always said I'll tell you what I think. I think he's got kind of self-radicalized and sort of pulled to the right over time. I think there was a bit of an ego factor with why he left Reform after, so there were two deputy leaders, and when Nigel took over, he restructured. He had a mini reshuffle. He made Richard, who had been the leader, the sole deputy leader, and at that point in time, he asked David Bull and Ben Habib to step back, and he probably said to them, "There'll be a chance for you to be involved in the future." Ben hadn't been happy for a while. He wasn't particularly, I could tell, many of us could tell, he wasn't overly thrilled that Nigel was coming back in, I think. And I think he also had been very outspoken while deputy leader about Lee Anderson joining the party. So he wasn't a happy bunny for a while. But he left and he started his own thing, and totally his right to do so. Nobody in a democracy, can be against the idea of competition and call themselves a Democrat. The whole point of politics is that you contest ideas, and I'm totally open to the idea that there are rival political parties. That's not a problem. But I think that this Tommy Robinson character, I think he's the kiss of death for any prospect of Advance UK really getting a credible hearing by mainstream decent people on the right. I just think he's, increasingly it's going to be quite a shrill minority, will join Advance UK. He said, Ben, that he will only register it once it hits a 30,000 member mark, which is quite a steep, target to hit. And there's a self-imposed target, because actually you don't need 30,000. There's no qualifying threshold to set up a political party. You don't even need to technically have members. Reform did so without members at the very beginning. It just had registered supporters. So this is a self-imposed target by Ben. And clearly he feels that, bringing in this Robinson character, who calls himself a citizen journalist and that he leads a cultural movement. Now, he's got a checkered past. I think many people will be familiar. I'm not going to get into all of that. But let's suffice it to say, I think this is a kiss of death politically for Ben, in terms of anybody on the mainstream sort of right of centre really wanting to get involved with the outfit. The idea of Tommy Robinson getting involved in UKIP was the final straw for many, I think including Ben at the time, to leave UKIP. So it's a funny old world, isn't it? How things end up. And then there's the weird appointment, and this is another sort of ex-Reform MP in this case. So Ben wasn't an MP, but let me just be clear, an ex-Reform figure, and this one is Rupert Lowe, who again, is quite a contentious character. I often make the joke that that Rupert could start a riot in an empty room or in a monastery. He's an outspoken political operator, and he rowed a lot with people when he was in Reform, and he's left and he's setting up his own political movement. He's not calling it a party at the moment. It's not going to be a party, he insists. It's going to be a cross-pollinating idea for the renewal of Britain, the restoration of all that we hold dear. And he's appointing, and it's bizarre, this one. He's appointing a current, I think he's still current, isn't he? He's still a current Conservative MP, Gavin Williamson. And Williamson, as I mentioned at the beginning, is a former chief whip of the Tories, former defence secretary, again under Theresa May, both of those roles, and then education secretary under Boris Johnson. And he was compared unfavourably, perhaps a little bit uncharitably, to Private Pike during the pandemic. This is not a guy who was widely considered to be highly competent. Now, I personally think he did an okay job in very difficult circumstances in education during the pandemic. some mistakes were made, but he had some really good people around him. He had a really good advisor, Ian Mansfield, in particular, who kind of, I think, just about kept the show on the road. But Gavin was no world beater. But in announcing him, Rupert's outfit, Restore Britain, they said we need people who know their way around Westminster and how the system works, and he'll add invaluable, make an invaluable contribution to Restore Britain. Well, it's not going down well online, let's put it that way. Widely reposted, and lots of people are really upset with Rupert, as inevitably they are going to be as soon as Rupert kind of shows his hand on what the real intent of Restore Britain is. Now, some people thought that he was going to make a real stab at starting a political party, and they're being sadly disabused of that notion, because Restore Britain is more about being a sort of a staging post, a vehicle for bringing together a bunch of people that he can then use to kind of batter his way into the Conservative Party. He's hoping for a sort of sea change whereby Kemi gets toppled, Robert Jenrick or somebody of that nature comes in, and he's kind of coming in with 20, 30,000 signed up members of Restore Britain. He's going to endorse the Conservatives when he joins. That's what a lot of us think is kind of the next logical step in Rupert's journey. Now, I could be wrong. It might be that he's not going to do that. And, I'll be the first to sort of hold my hands up if he stands as an independent MP and say, wow, I got that wrong. Or if he starts his own political party. I could well be wrong. But my instinct at the moment is that he's looking for a pathway into the Conservative Party. And the appointment of people like Gavin, this is all about sort of smoothing the way. And I don't think that Rupert in the past has. I think there's some tweets that were less than complimentary about Gavin before Rupert was an MP, sort of lurking about. I'm sure I've seen those shared. Look, you get strange bedfellows in politics, but Gavin Williamson joining Restore Britain, it's definitely not going to go down well. And I just think it shows, the sort of that it's not going to go that well, and there's going to be a lot of noses put out of joint by the end of this thing. And my advice is, just focus on political parties for the most part. And don't try and ride two horses, be in Restore Britain and in Reform UK. Just leave them to do what they want. Reform UK, we've got a lot to be getting on with. There's going to be a lot of opportunities for members to sort of shape the direction of the party. That's where people should put their focus. But I'm not telling anybody what to do. It's your right to do as you wish. But for me, I think they're a dead end. Returning to Advance UK, I think, as I say, I think this is the kiss of death. For Ben, I think, what's that saying? Advance to go, do not collect any seats. That's where this ends. With Reform UK, I'm really pleased. Adam is a good guy. He's sound. He's going to be helpful. And I do hope that people like him will stand again for Parliament under a Reform banner. We need people of experience. We need people of talent and conviction. And I say conviction. I know he didn't join Reform when he could have before the election, but he's showing the conviction now to leave a party that he's been in for a long time, to have the courage to kind of join something new. And he's served with distinction for his country in the past, and he's taken a stand on things that he believed in, like lockdowns. So, against lockdowns, I'll be absolutely clear on that in case I clip this up. I'm really encouraged by that appointment. So the good, the bad, and the weird. I hope you've enjoyed it. Do check out the rest of my channel. Leave any comments, for me to reply to. I really appreciate feedback on all of this. And they can be good, they can be bad, maybe even weird comments. And do give me a subscription if you can. Do subscribe. It's free on YouTube. Thanks very much. Cheers. Bye-bye.